Hi, this is Dave Spicer, and this is the second in my series on solving our credit crisis, which has become our financial crisis. And just as a review from the last video, I want to go through the system we put together to simulate money flowing through the banking system and, in fact, flowing out to businesses who need those funds to function on a daily basis. So this is the picture prior to November of 2007, and everything was fine. Loans were being made between banks and businesses. And then we have to ask, what happened? Well, tracking down what happened caused me to go back all the way to basically Enron, which was a energy company that got in some serious trouble. By the way, they were valuing their assets, and a lot of those principals of that company are now in jail. And that was the trigger for an act in Congress called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which essentially was trying to legislate morality after the fact. So Enron, the people there were put in jail without Sarbanes-Oxley in place. Along came this idea to actually provide some stiffer regulations and basically onerous regulations that are costing people a lot of money just to get a company to go from private sector to public sector, from private to public company rather. And key among one of the provisions was something called FAS 157, which was a mark-to-market valuation rule defined by FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, that was used to establish rules for marking certain assets to market value. And that works well for liquid assets like stocks and bonds, where you can get an instant sense of what the market is just by going to Yahoo or your favorite financial interface and finding out the value of a share of stock. Unfortunately, in November of 2007 is when the SEC decided to apply that rule to banks and how they value mortgage-backed securities. And the problem with that, of course, is that it's basically a negative feedback amplifier that ratchets down the value of thinly traded securities like mortgage-backed securities to ever lower depths and continues to ratchet them down. And it does so without taking into account the values of the component mortgages or the collateral properties behind those mortgages. Let me try an analogy on you. Let's say you owned a 1957 Chevrolet that was in mint condition. It's a classic car, and every year there are auctions that sell these cars for, let's just pick a number, $60,000, $70,000. But let's say someone came up to you and said, you have to sell that car by tomorrow. And of course, there's not an auction for another 6 months. So the only way you can evaluate the value of that car is to go to a source like Blue Book or a used car lot and find out the value of a 57 Chevy. And it turns out that on a used car lot, that 57 Chevy might be worth $2,000. Well, that's exactly what's happening in the world of mortgage-backed securities with this rule called FAS 157. So let's see what that does to our model. If we go back up to our model, and let's say November comes along of 2007, and it's causing these people to basically mark down their assets to about 20 cents on the dollar. So in this case, this guy's asset is going to lose $4 billion. And here's one that was $1 billion, and now it's going to lose minus $0.8 billion. So basically his total assets are down $4.8 billion just because of this rule, and he only had $4 billion in equity. So this guy is essentially out of business. Well, simultaneously, because everyone has to follow this rule, everyone else had to mark their assets down as well. So let's say this guy had to mark his down by $3 billion here. So he's lost that. and these guys are writing their assets down as well. And this whole thing is happening simultaneously. Well, now let's use A as our victim here, and his loan is coming due from Bank B, and as soon as he pays that off or asks for another one, Bank B is going to say, you know what, we don't trust you anymore. We've got a bunch of these assets like you do, and we know what we had to do. Well, you had to do the same thing, so we don't trust you anymore. And so we're going to, when we get paid back from this loan, or any cash from any loans, we're going to hold on to it because we need it for our balance sheet. And this is called deleveraging. Basically, it's taking money out of the system and sitting on it. So what basically happened was every one of these links was broken. And in fact, it broke this link over here because this guy can't get any money because he can't get any money from Bank A or any of these other banks. They're all sitting on their cash. So again, this is what's happened simultaneously to all the banks, and that's what's led to this gridlock in credit. So let's see how big the problem really is. Well, if you look at the total number of outstanding mortgages, that's a number like $12 trillion. Trillion. We're talking about a big number here. $12 trillion in outstanding mortgages. And 9% of these are delinquent 90 days or more. And of these, 50% are in foreclosure. And let's assume of those, 50% have a property value that's less than their balance, which means they're underwater. And let's assume that of these, let's give them a big hit. Let's say 50% of these actually have 50% of their outstanding balance is gone, okay? So they've been knocked down to 50% of their value. So the question then is, how big is this number? So if we get our trusty calculator out, we'll work in billions of dollars here. So we'll start with 12,000 billion, which is 12,000 billion is 12 trillion. And we'll take that times 0.9% times 0.5, 0.5 again, and one more, to come up with $135 billion problem, okay, which is a lot less than the $12 trillion problem. Of course, the problem is that this accounting rule doesn't allow you to take credit for the real value of the property. So it's basically tarring all the assets with the same brush as those of the bad assets. So we have a $135 billion problem. Let's actually, for our model going forward, let's say, let's see what as a percentage of the 12 trillion, that works out to be a little over 1%. So let's actually say that it's actually worse now. Let's make it a 2% problem. Let's say 2% of our loans are seriously damaged and need to be reevaluated. And that translates to, well, 2% of the 12 trillion is $240 billion, which is certainly a big problem and nothing to be proud of, but it's certainly not the $12 trillion problem that the mark-to-market rule is making of the situation. So the next thing we need to do is ask, well, how are these bailout options going to affect this? And again, we can turn to our model and simulate the system as we inject or try to inject $700 billion into the system. Looks like I'm running out of time now, so what I'm going to do is call a halt to this video and ask you to stay tuned for the next one, and we'll see.